Hello and welcome to the Blue Open Studio tutorial video series. The topic of this video will be animation. In this video, we will be discussing the different animation functions in Blue Open Studio, and we will demonstrate configuring and operating the different animation functions in the software. Inside of Blue Open Studio, there are 9 different animation functions available. The most common is visibility, and this allows you to toggle the visibility of the selected object during runtime. And any objects that are hidden or invisible cannot be clicked or tapped, and therefore cannot execute any sort of command animations applied to them. Then we have color animation, which allows you to modify the color of the object based on the value of a tag or expression. Then Bargraph. Inside Blue Open Studio, unlike GP Pro EX, we do not have a bar graph object or part. So what you would do is you would create your own bar graph based on the value of the selected tag or expression that is configured for the object. So a bar graph doesn't necessarily have to be a rectangle. You could make it a trapezoid, you can make it a triangle, a circle, whatever type of object you want to use. Then position animation allows you to modify the horizontal and or vertical position of an object during runtime. Think of this like a mouse pointer on your screen that you can configure based on touch or any other sort of tag or expression value. Then resize animation. This allows you to decrease or increase the size of an object during runtime. This is the type of animation you would use to emulate the pinch and zoom functionality that you see on modern smart devices. And we have Hyperlink, which allows you to launch a default browser and load the specified URL. But this isn't just for websites. You could load your default email program or FTP site, or even a default file based on this animation. Then rotation animation allows you to rotate the selected object. Unfortunately, the rotation animation does not work on a group of objects. If the animation is added to an object and then that object is grouped with others, that rotation animation will be disabled. And then text data link, which we've seen a little bit already when we looked at active objects, but this allows you to insert and display tag values in real time if you're using a keyboard or on-screen keypad to run the project. And then the command animation, which we've seen as well, allows you to execute a script or built-in function command at runtime. So we'll begin by looking at a few of the basic animation functions. So what I'll do is in the Project Explorer, under the Graphics tab, I'll expand my screens and I will open my Active Objects screen. And we'll start by creating a color animation for this push button group here. So in a previous video, we set these up to be on or off, so 2 states. And what we'll do is we'll first come up to the Graphics menu and select Ellipse. Then we'll just draw a quick circle on the screen. And then we will, with the object selected, come up to the graphics menu again. And you'll see all the way to the far right will be the animations group. And with that ellipse selected, we're going to click on color. And as you see now, once I clicked on it, it is highlighted in the group. So if I open the object properties and I drop down this list in the upper right, you see that I have my ellipse, and now I have my color animation. So this is where you can come to select the different properties or different pages for a selected object. So for color animation, the properties are set up with a type, which can be by limit or by color. A limit is where you give it an expression or a tag, and based on the value of that tag, it will display this specified color. If you select by color, what you have to use in here is what is called the RGBColor function in order to determine what color to display. And we'll show this type later on in the video. So we'll leave it set to by limit, and then you see that we have our limit expression field here. This is where we can insert a tag or expression. And for us, we are going to use the mode tag. And then we have the change limit below that. And we have fields here by default just 4 displayed. But if we click on more, then we get the more comprehensive list that we have. And for these columns, you have the change limit, which is the number, the actual value of the expression or tag in the limit expression field. Then we have the color, and this is the color that will be displayed for the specific limit or value. And then we have whether or not that specific color will blink. And you have 3 options: none, slow, or fast. Slow is based on a 600 millisecond cycle, so it'll flash on and off every 600 milliseconds. And fast is 200 milliseconds. And these are actually tied to the blink slow and blink fast system tags. So we're going to leave the limits set to where they are, 0 and 1, because those are our values for the push buttons. So we have that all set, and now we can come out. One more thing we're going to do is add a rectangle. And inside of this, we're going to create a caption. And our caption is going to be an if condition. So we're going to start with a open curly bracket. Then we're going to type if, parenthesis, mode equals 1, comma, and then in quotes, in double quotes, we're going to put auto, and then comma, and then in double quotes again will be manual, and then close parenthesis, close curly bracket. So basically what we're doing with this if condition is we're evaluating the value of the mode tag. If it equals 1, we're going to display the word auto. If it does not equal 1, we're going to display the word manual. And then we're going to hide the border and have no background. So now we have just what looks like a basic text box, but it's static text that we cannot edit. And then you see that I can't quite get it lined up. So what I'm going to do is I am going to first select the rectangle, and then holding down Shift, I'm going to select the ellipse. Then I'm going to come up to the Format menu, and you see a line here. I'm going to drop this down. I'm going to select Align Center. Then I'm going to come back in, drop it down again, and select Align Middle. And now both objects are lined up perfectly center and middle. So I will save. And then I will close the screen and start the runtime. And now once the runtime comes up, I'm going to click on Active Objects. And you see that I have my new ellipse here. And it shows the word manual, and it's in red. So if I click on one of the push buttons and I set it to on, you see that the ellipse changes color and it changes the word to display as auto. And I can toggle back and forth between the 2 states. Now we'll look at the visibility animation. So I'll come back into development and I will open the active object screen again. And this time we are going to show visibility for selected checkboxes under the sushi group. So the first thing I'm going to do is draw a rectangle down on the screen. And then in the properties, I'm going to add a caption. This first caption, I'm going to type in Nori. And now with the object properties open, I'm going to come up to the graphics menu. Then I'm going to click on visibility position. And you see as soon as I selected that, my object properties dialog opened up the visibility position animation feature for the rectangle. So it added the animation to the object and went right to its properties. Now one thing that is obvious here is that visibility and position are grouped together in the same configuration or properties dialog window. They do not have to be used at the same time. They can be used independently of one another. You can configure each one with different tags, different settings, whatever the case may be. They've just decided that visibility is so simple because it's one line that they're going to group it in with the position animation. And so for visibility, which is the only one we're going to look at right now, it's this very top field, just visibility. And this is similar to the enable or disable fields we've seen in the software. It evaluates as true or false. False being 0, true being any other value. So what we would do to create animation, we would put a tag in here, and then it would evaluate it either as 0, meaning that it is invisible, or non-zero, meaning that it's visible. Or we could put an expression in here. And if the expression is true, the object is visible. If the expression is false, the object is invisible. So for us, we're going to put an expression in here. What I'm going to do is click on the Browse button that's to the far right of the visibility field. And I am first going to find my sushi group, highlight that, and then click on Member. And then I'm going to make sure that Nori is selected, click OK, and then OK again. And you see that my tag sushi.nori shows up in the visibility field. And all we're going to do is at the end of this, we're going to add an equal sign and the number 1. So we've put an expression in where the tag sushi.nori equals 1. So if that expression evaluates as true, the object will be visible. If it evaluates as false, the object will then be invisible. And that's all we have to do to configure visibility. So now we have one of the sushi selections configured. We want to do the other 3. So all I'm going to do is copy this rectangle 3 times. And I'm going to change each one to represent the other checkboxes. I'm going to make this first one tuna. Change my visibility field to sushi.tuna. Then I'm going to go into the rectangle and change the caption to tuna. Then the rectangle to the right of the original nori rectangle, I'm going to change to be salmon. Change the caption. Now I go in and I simply change my visibility tag. And then the very last one will be rice. Okay, we have our 4 rectangles configured for visibility. I'm now going to save the screen. And you see that the runtime came back up. Now when I check one of these boxes, the corresponding rectangle will appear. So now we've seen visibility animation with 4 objects that have their own separate space. But if we were to stack these, it would behave slightly differently. So if I come in here and I stack these according to their layering properties, meaning their order, reposition a couple of these just a little bit. Okay, so now I have them staggered so we can see where they show up. If I save, come back in, and you see now they retain their layering properties as far as their order on the screen. So the most recent animated object does not jump to the foreground. So that is something to keep in mind when you are configuring your visibility animations. We saw visibility with each object having its own tag for visibility, but what if you wanted to do visibility based on a tag with different values? So for example, our motor speed group here, this is one tag called speed with 4 different values. What I'm going to do is I'm simply going to copy one of these rectangles, come in, and I'm going to change the visibility. Instead of it being one of the sushi class members, I'm going to set it to speed. And then I'm going to make this one, for example, equal to 0. Then I'm going to go into the rectangle and change the caption to off. And then I am going to copy this object, change the caption to slow, and then change the visibility for speed equal 1. Copy this again, change speed to equal 2 for visibility. Then back in the rectangle, caption will be medium. And then copy it one last time. Change the caption for this one to fast. And then go back to visibility. Change the speed equal to 3. So now I have my 4 different rectangles, all with the same tag for visibility animation, but each one having its own different value in the expression. And I'm going to now stack them. And I will group the objects together. And now when I bring up the group of symbols, I expand these, you see that I show each rectangle with its visibility, position, animation property underneath it. And you see that it's indented a little bit. That tells you that this item belongs to the one above it. So now I will save. Back in the runtime, when I select a specific speed, you see the corresponding rectangle is displayed. And this isn't layering like it is over here with the sushi selection that we saw. This is, if I ungroup, and I move these out, and then I save, it is simply displaying the specific rectangle based on the value of this expression. So when speed equals 2, that expression is true, that object is visible. If speed does not equal 2, that means the expression is false and it's invisible. So this just showed you 2 different ways to use visibility. Both were set up very similar, where we had a tag, the equal sign, and then a value. For these over here, where we're using a tag where it's simply 0 or 1 or true or false, we can get rid of the equal sign and the 1. So for example, each one of these, we could just simply put in the tag and it will interrogate that tag to see what the value is. So now, depending on whether the value of that tag is 0 or non-zero, we can display it based on that visibility field. Okay, I will show you one more visibility function, and this one will use command animation in order to toggle the visibility. So we'll go back into development, to the active object screen, and to the linked picture that we put on in a previous video. We'll double click to open the properties. I'll come up to the menu on the graphics tab, and I will click command and visibility. And now you see that I have both show up underneath the linked picture. So first, for visibility, I'm going to set this to be mode, just like that, just the mode tag. And then I'm going to drop this down and go into command, and I'm going to select the on up tab and change the type from VB script to toggle tag. And in this field, I'm going to enter in mode. And now that linked picture is all set, but I actually want to toggle between 2 different pictures. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy that linked picture. I'm going to change visibility. Instead of it just saying mode, it'll be mode equals 0. And then command will stay the same because I want to toggle the same tag. Then I will come back up, and on linked picture, I'm going to change this. So we have it as the test_off.png. If I open up Windows Explorer and I go into my training folder, I copied in a previous video the test_off.png and test_on.jpg into my training folder. I'm going to change that from the test_off.png to the test_on.jpg. And there's a couple different ways we can do it. We could copy this file name along with the extension, just do a Control-C, and then paste it into here. We could type it in, or I could browse and go back into the root of my application directory and select the test_on.jpg. And I will just simply click refresh. I come back, and now you see that I have two separate linked pictures. And I will simply lay them over top of one another, make sure that everything is right. Okay. Now I will save. Then back in the runtime, when I toggle, you see that it flips between the two different linked pictures. And I can also do the same here. By simply clicking on each one, I have now put a command animation onto an image, onto a linked picture that allows me to toggle the value of that tag as well. So now we will take a look at the other animation functions in Blue Open Studio. And for that, we'll create a new screen. So I'll go back into development. I will close the active object screen. And then I'll open the template. Then come up to the menu and select Save As. And I will save this screen as Animations. Once I save it, you see that the new screen shows up under the screen list. And now the template screen has been closed and the animation screen is open. And we will begin by showing the bar graph animation. So the first thing I'll do is up on the graphics menu, I will select rectangle, and I will draw a new rectangle. And then I will come into the properties. I'll first change the color for the border to black, and for the fill, I will set that to white. And then it will come back up to the graphics menu. With the rectangle still selected, I will click on bar graph. And you now see that the bar graph object properties dialog appears. And to configure the bar graph animation, it's pretty straightforward. We have three fields. We have the tag and expression field, the minimum value, and the maximum value. So you could set a tag in here to go from 0 to 300, and you could scale it based on the min and max values. For us, we're going to leave the minimum and maximum at 0 and 100 respectively. And for the tag expression, we're going to create a new tag that's going to be called temperature. I'm going to create it as an integer, scope as local. And then below the three fields, we have the foreground color, which we can select. And this is the color it will use to fill the bar graph. So what I'm going to do is I am going to select green. And then below that, we have direction and orientation. And direction is, how does it fill? Does it fill it vertically or horizontally? And then orientation is, where does it start from? Does it start from the top, the bottom, or the center? And does it fill up, down, or from the center in both directions? For this one, we're going to leave it as up. But I am going to copy this twice. And the second one, I will make the orientation center. And the third one, I'll make the orientation down. So we now have three bar graphs configured, but we need a way to change the temperature tag. We could do it through the database SPY, but for this animation, we're going to use a linked symbol. And we will go into more detail about how link symbols are configured and exactly what they are in another video. But to add a link symbol to your screen, go to the graphics menu, and you will see just to the left of animations will be the libraries group. And you will see the symbols button. If we click on that, it will open the symbols library. And by default, it sets you to the system symbols. So what we will do here is we will go to sliders, and we will select slider 01. And by clicking on it, you see that my mouse icon changed with a little rectangle underneath the pointer. That means that I have it copied essentially. I'll go back to my animation screen, and when I click again, it will drop that link symbol down to onto the screen. I will then place it. I'll move my bar graphs over so we can see them. Then if I double click on the link symbol, it comes up with the object properties. And these object properties can be pre-configured for the link symbol. And we'll show that when we get into link symbols in another video. We'll leave them in the max set to where they are, and for the tag name, we will enter in temperature. Now we have that configured. So I will now save. And now I will need to add a navigation button to get to this screen. So I'll open my navigation screen. I will copy my active objects button, come into the properties. Now we'll change the open command from active objects to be animations. And then on the button, I will change the caption to animation. I will save. Bring up the runtime, and I see my new button has appeared on the left-hand side. Click on that. I show my new animation screen. And now when I click on the slider, I can change the value of that temperature tag and it fill the bar graph based on its value from the range that we've configured, which is 0 to 100. And you see each different orientation, the top, the bottom, and the center, how they fill. Okay, so we will now look at the position animation. So I'll go back into development. I will close my navigation screen. I'm going to leave my symbols library open because we are going to use some more of the sliders throughout our animation demos. So go back to the animation screen. I'll first come up to the graphics menu, click on ellipse, draw a circle, and then come over to animations and click on visibility position and open the properties of the ellipse. And we already discussed the visibility field. Below that, everything else is for position animation. And it's broken up into 3 different sections. There's the horizontal and the vertical, and then the slider or gestures. Horizontal and vertical are set up almost identical. You have a field for a tag or expression. Then you have a value range, which is the range to evaluate the tag expression. So you could have it 0 to 100, 0 to 1,000, negative 30 to positive 30, whatever the case may be. Then your position is your pixel location based on the starting location in the development. So for example, where it's located here, that would be position 0. And then 100 would be the maximum offset. So it would be 100 pixels from this. So it would be 100 pixels to the right. If you wanted to go to the left, you would make this a negative number, and that would take it 100 pixels to the left. And then you have a reference. The reference is the location for the object that it uses as the orientation for the position animation. So for example, for horizontal, you have left, center, and right. And what it does is, if you select left or right, it will take the furthest left or right pixel respectively as the reference point it uses for the offset for the animation. And center, of course, it would take center or one of the 2 center pixels. For vertical, it's the same thing except you have top, center, and bottom. And then below these are the slider/gesture group. Below this, you have the slider/gestures group. And this is what is used to create the slider linked symbol that we've placed on the screen when we demoed the bar graph animation. With that enabled, that allows you to click on an object and use it as a slider, so to increment a value for position. An inertia is what you would use if you want to emulate a flicking gesture. So normally with just slider enabled, if you would flick on a touch screen, as soon as you remove your finger from that screen, the position animation would stop. With inertia checked, if you were to flick, it would use momentum to keep carrying that object either to the left or to the right, depending on how you flicked, and then eventually it would kind of slow down. So think of it like what you see on some smartphone applications with flicking gestures. Then we have the disable and security fields, which we've seen throughout the application so far. So for this object, we're going to create two new tags because we're going to configure both horizontal and vertical position. So for horizontal, we're going to enter in left, right, no spaces or dashes. And then I'm going to create the tag as an integer with scope as local. And then for vertical, I'm going to create up, down. And once again, this tag is going to be integer with scope as local. I am going to leave the references set where they are, the value ranges set where they are, in the position for the horizontal set from 0 to 100. In the position for the vertical, I'm going to set 0 to -100. And the reason being is if you viewed a previous video on screens, you know that for graphics, the starting position or starting pixels of 0 and 0 are in the upper left-hand corner. And then for a horizontal orientation, the pixels move out to the right, and for vertical, they move downward. So what I have done here is I've essentially set the position animation for horizontal to move from the left as a starting position to the right. And for the vertical, from the bottom as a starting position, moving up. So now what I will do is I'll go back into my symbols library and I will select slider 09, drop this down on the screen, I'll just position it over here, and then I will change for the properties just the tag name, and this one will be left, right. I'll go back into the symbols, select slider 05, come back in, drop that down on the screen. I'll actually reposition these a little bit just to make it easier. And then for this one, the tag name will be up, down. And I will leave the values at 0 to 100. And now I'll simply move my ellipse to be a little closer. Then I will save. Then back in the runtime, I can now move my ellipse based on the sliders and the values that I'm entering in. Now we can't move this by clicking on it right now. But if we come back in here and enable slider, we save, come back into runtime, now we can move the object based on simply clicking and dragging on it. As you see, my cursor keeps moving, but the object stays where it is because of the range that we've configured for both the value and the position. Okay, now we will look at resize animation. I'll go back into development, come back up to the graphics, and then I will draw a rectangle. And then I will open up the properties, come back up to the graphics menu, and click on resize. And you see that the resize object properties show up. And the resize is set up similar to the position animation configuration. you have a height and a width, but they're set up very similar to each other. You have the tag expression fields, then you have the value ranges. Instead of position, you have size, and you have 0 to 100, and this is in percentage. So a 0% size essentially is no size at all. And then, of course, you have the reference, which once again is where it begins, its starting or its anchor point for the resizing. So for height, we have the top, center, and bottom. So if we leave it set to top, when it resizes the height, the top will remain located and it will grow downward. And for width, if we leave it set to left, the left side, leftmost pixel of the object will remain stationary, and then it will resize or grow out to the right. And then we have the gesture properties, which enable an inertia just like with the position animation. And then of course our disable and security fields. So for this, we're going to create 2 new tags because we're going to configure the height and the width. So for height, we're going to put a tag name of height. Set it as an integer with scope as local. And then for width, the tag will be width. Integer type, scope of local. And then for the value ranges, I'll leave them from 0 to 100 for both height and width. For the size, I don't want to go all the way down to 0. I want to start with a 100% size and triple that. So I will put in 300. The same for the width, 100 to 300. I'll leave the gesture boxes unchecked. I'll leave references the way they are. Now, with the object configured, I'll go back into my symbols and I'll pick the same 2 sliders. So slider 9, place it down here, put it at the top, and this of course will be a width. Back into the symbol library, slider 5, drop that down on the screen, open up the properties, and of course this will be height. Then I will position this object at the very top left corner between the 2 sliders. Now I will save. Back in development, I can now click on the slider to resize my shape. So if we wanted to change this, let's say instead of the reference being the top left, we want it center. I can change that. And before I save, I will just move it out a little bit. Now it will grow outward in both directions, and of course outward top and bottom as well. This is based on the location that you pick for that reference. I'll put it back. Actually, I'll put it here. Come back in, change my reference points back to top left. But now for the width, I will set the size range from 300 at the upper limit to negative 300 at the lower. And I will also set the height 0 to 100. Now I will save. And as you see back in development, there is no object. And that is because we have a height of 0%, meaning 0 pixels. So it's not even a line, because a line even is 1 pixel high. So there is no object. It's still there, you just can't see it because it doesn't have 2 dimensions. It's a 1-dimensional object at this point. So as soon as I start increasing the height, you see that it shows up. And you see now, as I increase my width, it goes from negative 300, which is extended all the way to the left. It comes back, and then it goes all the way out to the right. So this is a way if you wanted to create a selection or bar graph that can say cover from the center going left to right, you would do a positive to a negative for the range. So now I'll show you the hyperlink animation. Back in development, on my animation screen, I'll go up to graphics and I will select button and I will draw a button on the screen. And then I'll open the properties. So if we were to create a button, typically you would put a command animation behind it. However, it's not necessary that you use command animation. That is the most popular animation to use. But if I go back to graphics, I can select hyperlink. And now with the hyperlink animation, I can use that to execute a different type of function than the command animation. So for the hyperlink animation, there are a few different fields. First, there's the type. So under hyperlink type, you have several different types you can select. The big ones are file, other, HTTP and HTTPS, and then of course mail to. And mail to uses your default email program you have configured on your PC. So for this first one, we're going to configure this to open a driver manual. So we're going to leave it set at other. And then we have two fields below that. We have the URL field, or which would be the file path in our case that we would enter in here. Now we could enter a tag or expression in here as well, or static text. And for us, we're going to enter in static text, and what we're going to do is we're actually going to browse to the PDF. So I'm going to open Windows Explorer. I'm going to go into my C drive. Let me expand this here. And I'm going to go under Program Files, x86. Then I'm going to find Proface. Then Blue Open Studio version 8.0. Then DRV. Then I'm going to navigate down to the M's and find MOTCP.pdf. That's what I'm going to use. But first, I am going to copy the file path. We'll close Windows Explorer, come back into URL, paste this in, and note at the end I need to put in a / motcp.pdf. And then below this we have the disable field, then of course the e-sign and security fields. But if we simply wanted to open the URL, we are now set. But I will go back into button and I will change this caption to open driver manual. And now our button is all set with the hyperlink animation. I will save. Then back in the runtime, when I click on this button, you see that the PDF is now opened. And if I scroll all the way back up to the top, it is the MOTCP communication driver manual. So this is a quick and easy way to configure a button to open a manual. And as I mentioned before, you can also configure this button for a tag or expression. So you can put either the entire file path or just part of the path, because all of the driver manuals are located in this directory. You could then do an and then in curly brackets, put in your specific driver file you wanted, and then .pdf. And then you can dynamically change what help manual to open based on the value of that tag. I'm just going to change this back to MOTCP. Now, I will copy this button. I'll come back in, and now we will look at opening an actual hyperlink. So for hyperlink type, I will change this to HTTP. And you see that it put in http:// at the beginning of the URL. So I don't have to worry about entering that in. And we're just going to do some very basic www.google.com. And then I will go back to the button and I will change the text to Google. I will save. And back in the runtime, I'll click on the button. And you see that Google now showed up. So we showed you how you can use the hyperlink animation to either open a file or a website. But let's say that you want to prevent this from opening based on security. So we'll just quickly use the disable field. And for this, we're going to create a new tag called hyperlink. Now I'm just going to enter in the tag name itself. I'm going to set this as a Boolean with scope of local. And then I am going to create a new rectangle right next to this. And in the caption, I'm going to do an if condition. If, then open curly bracket, hyperlink equals 0, comma, and then in quotes, enabled, comma, and then in quotes, disabled. Close parenthesis, close curly bracket. So this is an if condition evaluated in the tag of hyperlink. If it equals 0, display the word enabled. If it does not equal 0, display the word disabled. And then in front of that, I'm actually going to put internet access. Click OK. Now I have an error for my expression. And it asks if I want to set the expression as a comment. If I click yes, it will close it. If I go back in, put 2 backslashes in front of it. So what I will do is I will clear that out. And I will look for my error. And where the error is I should have put an open parenthesis after the if and a open curly bracket before. Now if I click OK, everything's all right. So now I will come back up to graphics, and with the rectangle still selected, I will click command. And I will add a command animation to this. And I will do it on up, set the type to toggle tag, and enter in hyperlink. With that configured, I will save. And back in the runtime, it shows that it's enabled. If I click on the button, it brings me to the web page. If I come back and I click on the button, it now disables. No matter how much I click, it's disabled, it will not fire. So now we'll go back into the development and we'll look at rotation animation. So on the screen, I will come up to shapes and I will select to create a closed polygon. I'll start by actually creating what looks like an arrow. And I have that. I will come in, I'll set the fill, bring it over a little, then I'll go back into my symbols and I'll select another slider. This time I will select slider 04, drop this down, and I will bring up the properties for the slider, and we'll create a new tag in here for tag name called rotation. And we'll leave the min and the max value set at default. And we'll create this tag as an integer with local scope. And then I will highlight my polygon, come back into graphics, and in the animations group I will select rotation and bring up the properties. In the object properties for rotation, you have your tag or expression, which it will interrogate to find out the current value. And then you have the range and then rotation in degrees. And the range is the values that the tag we'll have the min and the max, so an upper and lower limit. So for us, we left the slider at 0 to 100, so we set the range minimum 0, maximum 100. By the way, like every other field for almost every single animation property, you can insert tags or values in for the min and max. Just about every configurable field for animations can not only have a static value, but also a tag entered in, so those can dynamically change during runtime based on any desired conditions. Then we have the rotation, and this is in degrees. So the start and the end. For us, we will leave the start at 0, and we'll set the end to 360. So it will do a full rotation. We could go above that. We could do, 720. We could do 1080, whatever amount of rotation you want. Or we can even go lower. Just do simple 90-degree rotation or 180 or 60 or whatever the case may be. Then you have the reference dropdown, and this is the point for the object that will select as the rotation center, meaning at this point we will begin rotation. So for example, you have the top left, bottom left, true center, and then of course the right top and bottom. For us, we will leave it set to left top. And then you have for gesture, just like we saw with position, you have the capability to enable it and also to use inertia. And then advanced, you have an offset that you can configure, and this is in pixels for rotating an object. So let's say, for example, you want to make a model in here of the solar system. You have a circle at the center, that's the sun, and you have the planets rotating around it. Well, to have those planets rotate around that middle, you would do an offset for pixels of the X and Y axis. And then counterclockwise allows you, when you increase the value, it will, instead of rotating clockwise, it'll rotate counterclockwise. And by default, it does rotate clockwise, but you can, of course, set this to a negative number instead of just 0 for the start. So you can actually rotate left or rotate right, meaning it rotates backwards or rotates forwards based on the range and the rotation degrees. So for our tag expression, we're going to put the new tag we just entered in, rotation. And everything else we're going to leave set the way that it is. Now we have this configured. Actually, I am going to shrink this down just a little bit here, just to make it a little easier to handle. Anchor point. There we go. I'll drag this, actually I'll drag it out a little bit, give us some room. So our top left, meaning this point right here, is going to be our center for rotation. So I'm going to click Save. And then back in development, I can begin adjusting the slider and rotating the object. You see that our center point now is that top left, and it rotates the object around that point. If I come back in and say I set this reference to center, and let's say that I also set counterclockwise, and I save. Now when I rotate, it'll rotate the middle, and you see that it's rotating the opposite direction when I increase and then when I decrease. And one more, I'll set the offset of 50 by 50. Of course, turn that off. And I will do the left top again. And then I save. And now when I rotate, you see that it rotates 50 degrees off by the X and Y axis, which actually puts it somewhere about right here as your center point. Additionally, for the rotation, you can also, instead of doing a positive number, we could do a negative as well. And now it's rotating it from the left upper side. So as we rotate, we see that it is somewhere around here. It's treating as the center point for the rotation of the object. Okay, so I will go back into development, and I want to show you how you can use the visibility animation to create transparency. So not necessarily visible or invisible, but allowing an object to have a certain transparent element to it, or opaqueness, depending on what you want. So the first thing I will do is I'll go back into symbols, and I will select slider 01. And then come back to my animation screen, drop the slider down here. And then I will come into the properties for the slider, and I will create a new tag called visibility. And I will create the tag, this time as a real with a scope of local. When you want to use visibility to show transparency, you have to keep in mind that the visibility animation is either true or false, meaning a 0 or a 1. Typically, that is how it works for the majority of features inside of Blue Open Studio. If it's enable or it's disable or anything else, it's true or it's false. It could be one state or another. It can't be somewhere in between. For visibility, though, you can set it somewhere in between 0 and 1. And this is why we created the visibility tag as a real. So I'm going to leave the min at 0, and I'm going to set the max to 1. So with the way this is set, the slider will go from 0 and scale up until it reaches 1 as the max. So it's actually going to go through fractions or decimal places between 0 and 1. And that's what we'll use to create transparency. So back on the screen, we'll go to graphics, and I'm just simply going to create another circle. And for this circle, I'm going to come in, enable visibility, and for the visibility field, I'm going to type the tag in visibility. Now that I have that set, I will save. And then back on the screen in runtime, you see that my visibility slider is set to 0. As I increase that, you see that the ellipse slowly comes into view, or it becomes visible on the screen, going from 0 to 1. So you can use this type of animation to create transparency, or to lay a, let's say, plate or highlight over another field. For example, you have a button that needs to be noticed, and you don't necessarily want to use flashing or anything like that. You want to use a softer color. Transparency could be one option on how to do that. So now we will walk through configuring an object to use multiple animation functions. So I'll go back into development, and I will copy the slider in the upper left of the screen, which is our temperature slider. Bring it over here, and I'll open the properties just to make sure everything's set the way that I need it. 0 to 100 for min and max, and tag for temperature. And then I will copy the furthest left rectangle that we configured as a bar graph. I'll bring it over here. I'll come in to the object properties, and I will make sure that everything's set the way that I want it for this. This is. So I'll go back into graphics, and I will also click on color. So what we will do now is we will create this bar graph to show varying colors based on its value. How we're going to configure it in our change limits, have 0, and then 25, 50, and then 75 as our limits. And then for the colors, 0 will be green, 25 we'll make yellow, 50 we'll make orange, and finally 75 we'll make red. We need to configure the limit expression, and for this we're just going to put in the same tag, temperature. And you notice that for my 0 change limit I have the color green. If I come back into the bar graph, my foreground color is set to that same one. It's not necessary that you do that, but we do recommend it because it makes it a little easier to view the object during runtime. I mean, you can keep it to say a different color without any real performance issues. And it's just recommended that you set both to be the same. So now I'll come up and save. And back in development, I will scroll this, and you see as my values change, so does the color for the bar graph. So now I will show you one little issue with the color animation. I'm going to copy this bar graph. I'm going to come into the color option, and for the change limit, I am going to reverse them. So I'm going to put 75 at the top, 50, 25, and then 0. And of course, I'm going to change the colors to correspond. So now I will save. And as I increase the temperature, you see that it stays green until it reaches the top. That is because of the order that we have our change limits in. It actually is reading that from the top to the bottom. So it can get a little tricky when you're configuring this if you do not set them in ascending order. So start from the lowest at the top and work your way to the highest at the bottom for your color animation. Earlier in this video, when we were discussing color animation, we saw that you can change it by limit, but then also by color. And I mentioned that for that, you need to use the function RGBColor in order to use that type of color animation. I will show you how to configure that with this next demonstration. So I'll go back into development, and I am going to copy this slider, bring it down here, and then I am actually going to change the properties first. I'll leave the min at 0, and I will set the max to 255. Now I'm going to create a new tag, and I'm going to call it red. I'll create this as an integer with scope of local. And then I will copy this slider twice. And I will change the next one from red, create a new tag called green. Once again, an integer with scope local. And then the last one will be blue. And now I'll just make myself a little bit more room here. Bring these up here. Bring these up a bit. And then I will go to graphics, and I'm simply going to draw a basic rectangle. And then with it highlighted or selected, I will click on color animation and open the properties. And now for the color animation, I'll change the type to by color. And then for the color expression, I'm going to enter in the function RGBColor, and then open parenthesis, close parenthesis. And I'm going to leave that there for now because I want to show you what this function does. So I will set it as a comment, come out of here, and then I will search the tech graph for RGB color. And this returns the number of the color defined by the RGB red, green, blue codes. So how it sets up is for the function, we have 3 arguments that need to be passed. The number for the red color, number for the green, and number for blue. So for example, we have examples down here, RGB color 51, 153, 102. And it says here this function will return the value, and then here's the numerical representation, which is a color code for sea green. Of course, now we see that we can also put tags in here, and that's what we are going to do. So I'll go back into my development, open the properties back up. I'll remove the comment for color expression. Now inside of the parentheses, I'm going to put in my 3 arguments. So I'm going to put in the 3 tags I just created. Red, comma, green, comma, blue. And if you're not sure what order they need to be in, it is actually listed in the name of the function, RGB. So it goes red, green, and blue. And that's all we need to do to configure this color animation. So now I'll save. Back in the runtime, we see that the rectangle is colored in black, and that's because all three of those are set to 0. If we start increasing one of these, we see that it slowly changes. So now I increased red to 255%. So now it's all red. If I were to increase all three of these, we now get the other end of the scale, which is white. So somewhere in between is every single possible color we could think of, depending on how we configure these. So we have now configured the RGB color type of the color animation. But let's say that we want to quickly reset this back to zeros. I'm going to come back in to development, open the properties for the rectangle, go back to the graphics menu, and then click on command. And when the command object properties show up, I'm going to go to the on up tab, and I'm going to reset all three of those tags to 0. So I'm first going to type in $, which will bring up the IntelliSense or autofill window, and I'll start typing red. See that it highlights, I hit enter, and then I'll just make it equal to 0. Do the same for green, and then finally blue. And then I will save. Then back in the runtime, when I click on this, it resets all three of them back to their default of 0. And then of course I can adjust, then reset them back. So let's say that the sliders, while great in displaying possible color combinations, is a little too difficult to type in or enter a specific numerical value for each one. So now we're going to use text data links in order to allow a user to enter in a specific number for each color. So I'll go back into development, and I will first type text, and this will be red color. And then I will hit enter. Then I will copy that twice. Change the second one to green. And the last one to blue. And then now I will select all three. I'll come up to the Format menu, and then I will click on Align. And that will align them all up to the furthest left. And I'll go to Graphics. And with multiple objects selected, you can sometimes have animations available to you. So what I will do is I will first select red, and you see that text data link isn't available to me from the menu. But if I go into the properties, I have it here. And we'll click on it, and then for the tag expression, I will type in red. I'll leave it formatted auto, and I will enable input, and I will put in a minimum value of 0, maximum value of 255, and I will actually create a disable tag for this one called disable red. And I'll create that as a Boolean with local scope. Then I will go into green, enable text data link, tag will be green. I'll enable input, minimum value will be 0, max will be 255, and once again disable green for the disable field. And then create that one as a Boolean as well, local scope. And then finally blue. And now we have 3 input fields for the colors. But we also put in the disable field. So now we're going to have to configure an option to disable that. And for that, we will go back to graphics and we'll use the checkbox. And I will quickly draw a checkbox here. And in the properties, the caption for this one, we are going to use a tag property. So I'll use curly brackets, and inside of there, I will type in disable red dash greater than sign name. Once again, we're using the tag property name to get the tag name for the disable red tag to display it. And we do this because if the disable red tag ever changes name, we change it somehow, it will update without us having to come back in here and change the text of the caption. And the tag will be disable red. We'll leave true value at 0, and then we'll leave everything else set to default. And now I will copy this checkbox twice. Second one I will change to green. And the last one will be blue. Then I will select all 3, go to the Format menu, then click Align to line them up. And then I will save. And now we see we have the option of typing in a color here. So for example, I will put in 128 for red, for green 128, and for blue 128. It's not taking it, and that's because I did not set my maximum value properly for this input. So I'll change the maximum value from 100 to 255, save again. Now I can come in here and change it to 128. And you see now I have all 3 entered, and I get a gray color. So if I disable red, I am now not able to enter in a value here, but of course I can still change it through the slider. Same thing for green and for blue. So now you've seen using a combination of animations to create a color palette sampler. And this is just a very basic example of what you can do with all of these animations. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact ProFace America Technical Support by phone at 1-800-289-9266, option 2, or by email, support@profaceamerica.com. You can also visit our website, profaceamerica.com, for manuals, drivers, product FAQs, and other product and software information. Thanks again, and have a great day.